Seif Yudalid, the Mechaber says that you have to understand the four parashiyos of Tefillin in, let's say, the Shel Rosh. So they're on different cloth, they're different cloths, they're different pieces of cloth. So apparently it used to be that the Seifrim would write them to the size that they were. There was no extra parchment on either end. So what would invariably happen is that the shorter parashiyos would be shorter than the longer ones, which is pretty obvious. Now that's fine, but apparently there's a certain beauty to have all of them the same weight. So how do you get, if ones are smaller and bigger, and they're only cut to size, so how do you get them to be the same weight? So it says the Mechaber, HaSeifrim has a reason. Those Seifrim that were very careful, they would make the sizes, maybe the sizes were different, but the thickness were also different. So the smaller ones were thicker, the bigger ones were thinner, so that it would equal in weight at the end. Mechaber says, "Ha'av yoyse lichter beParshas Shema shikatana, v'hadak mimenu leParshas Vayim Shemoya sheyoyse gedola, Parshas Kadesh leParshas Vayikav Yacha shemaruchas oisim klaf dak ma'oid, u'bezei yismal habatim b'shav v'zeh noi." It's a beauty to have them all the same size, so it'll fill up the boxes in the same way. So one is not like jingling around in the other one. So they would have thicker for smaller and thinner for longer, so that it would be the equal of the weight. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says that we don't do this anymore. What we do is very simple. They're all the same length. And there's just spaces in the beginning and spaces at the end. So that's what we do. What we do nowadays is we just have all the klafim are the same size. We just have space. Easy. The Mechaber then says in Tesvav. Now, before we start Mechaber and Tesvav, let's do the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah gives two hakdamas. The Mishnah Berurah says we're now entering the world of psulim with the ksav. When your brother is checking mezuzahs and tefillin, this is the siman that he's Isaac. So the Mechaber says, the Mishnah Berurah says like this in Lamed Daled. Naktim beis hakdamas. I want to give two introductions. And then the Shulchan Aruch will be very clear. Aleph, number one, Kol ois sar she'alav tzurasai haroi la'osei ois. Every letter has to be written, and it has to look the way a letter is supposed to look. Meaning, the hey has to look like a hey, the dalet has to look like a dalet. V'im lav, and if the hey doesn't look like a hey, it's puzzle. Okay, so there's no option of it doesn't, like the hey got messed up, and you're like, well, I write messed up heys. No. There's a certain surah that every letter is supposed to be, and if you deviate, it's puzzle. Fine. And he says, and it doesn't matter whether it was written properly then got messed up, or you wrote it messed up. It doesn't matter. It's going to be puzzle. Beis, kol oy she'ein gvil mukaf la me'arba ruchoseh psula. The halacha is that the outside of each letter has to be surrounded by klaf. What do I mean? If, let's say, you write a letter and you go all the way to the top, so that on the outside of the letter there is no parchment, it's puzzle. The outside, you need to be able to see parchment on all four sides. That also means, by the way, if you have a letter and right above the hey there's a hole, so that it's not surrounded on all four sides, that's also going to be an issue. Now, but there's two details about this. Aleph, dafkim lo have mukaf gvil koidim ksiva. Av lachar ksiva nasa nekev oikara samach lois mechutz, but there's a mukaf gvil kosher. If it was written properly and it was surrounded by four sides at the time of writing, but then afterwards there was a tear, that's fine, as we'll talk about later on. That's tomorrow. So next week. So if when I wrote the hay, there was no rip on top of the hay, so it was surrounded on all four sides. But then after I wrote it, then there was a hole became or a tear. That's okay. It's at the time of the ksiva. And Beis, number two, is das roiv hapoiskim the ein sarach liyos mukach kvil rak mibachutz v'loy betoichay. The majority of opinions feel that it doesn't matter what's inside the letter. Meaning, as long as it's surrounded by parchment, it's fine. Let's say you have a mem, and it's surrounded on the outside, but on the inside there's a hole right by the letter. Not in the middle, because if in the middle that's fine. But I'm talking about, let's say this is the top of the mem, and there's a hole right there, so that the letter is not surrounded on the inside by klaf because there's a hole there. The majority of poskim feel that that's okay. The Yerushalmi is strict. The Yerushalmi says no, inside like outside. Now let's start the Mechaber. The Shulchan Aruch says, Im la'acher shenichtav nikav b'toichahei. If after you wrote it, the truth is even before you wrote it, if there was a hole inside of the hay, so that it's not, and you can see over here, they have pictures, but it's basically that at the top of the hay and the inside there's a hole. So it's not surrounded. So says the Mechaber, oimem, kosher. it's kosher. Even if the entire thing is a hole, a giant tear from one leg of the hay to the other, it's kosher. Because again, the ikr is the outside, not the inside. The Yerushalmi disagrees. The Yerushalmi says, no, it's a problem as well. Now, by the way, the Mishnah Berurah points out an interesting halacha. What happens if you look at the Mishnah Berurah Lamed Hey? Hu adin shar oisi sheishel and gimel tefanis. Again, outside, problem. Inside, majority of poskim say it's fine. So here's the shaila. What's the inside when you have an endachaf? Right? You have the endachaf, so it's by the, let's say, the 90-degree angle. Is that the inside? Is it the outside? There is no inside really. So the halacha is that when you have a letter that has three walls, like a chaf, like a ches, then that's the inside, and it's okay. But when you have a letter that just has two walls, there is no inside. There's just outside. And therefore, if there's a hole by the chaf, that's a problem. Again, you have to remember all these things, because if you're a Seifer, the Seifrim have to know all these halachas. They open up a mezuzah, they open up a tefillin, and they see the hole there. So you got, first of all, if the hole is there, but let's say it's the inside. If the hole is the inside, you're fine. But if it's a chaf, there is no inside. So now it's on the outside. So the halacha is on the outside, is that if it was written like that, then it's a problem. I don't know how a Sefer would know how it was written, because you don't know if the hole developed later. I assume holes are not going to develop when it's sitting in the box. I would just assume that it's probably from before, but I don't know. So then the Mishnah Berurah also says, what happens if it's taka, the hole is mamish on the inside, like legamri, from one leg to the other? So according to Yerushalmi, that's a problem. So here's the eitzah. Thin out the sides so that there's a little bit of klaf, so that the hole doesn't go from leg to leg. If you thin out the side, says the Mishnah Berurah says, "Va'afilu noga nekiva." He says, "Yesh," in the end of Lamed Zayin, "Yesh ligror ma'at mibefnim ma'oivi akav shalois v'yamukav gvil." Just thin out the sides so that the hole is no longer from leg to leg. There's a little bit of klaf in between, a little bit of daylight, and then you're all right. Let's just start the next part of the halacha, and then we'll stop. The Mechaber then says, Nikif regel pnimi shalhei. You know what, actually, let's stop here, and you'll remember that we're up to this, because this is going to take us into a whole new discussion about holes in the letters, in the actual letter itself, not the klaf. In the letter itself, there's a hole. We'll talk more about this next